Welcome back to another episode of Locked On Chiefs and Locked On Texans. We are going to be getting into this matchup that may be a little bit of a playoff preview as well today on Locked On Chiefs and Locked On Texans.
You are Locked On NFL Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey, Chiefs Kingdom. Welcome back for another episode of Locked On Chiefs, your daily podcast covering the Kansas City Chiefs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you for always making the Locked On Chiefs podcast and the Locked On Texans podcast your first listen of the day. Don't forget, we're free and available on all platforms, including YouTube as well. I am Chris Clark. You can find me over at Chiefs Corner. We are going to be talking with Locked On Texans host here in just a second, Big Sarge. But today's Crossover Thursday is presented by Prize Picks. Download the app and use code LOCKEDONNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. Brian, or Big Sarge, I'll just call you that because
sure.
I know that's what you go by, bud.
Yeah.
So we'll just do that. When you look at this game, this is, first off, before we started the show, both you and I agreed it is crazy how quickly this season has gone. How are we possibly in week 16 already? And both of these teams have to deal with what the Chiefs are dealing with right now, in that they play a game last Sunday. Now they're playing on Saturday. And guess what? They get to play again on Wednesday. So they're all dealing with it. But this one's going to be a fun one. Texans, Chiefs. Lots of different memories come up when I talk Texans, Chiefs. But what is the big storyline that's coming out of Houston right now?
The big storyline is that on Wednesday, the NFL announced that Derek Stingley Jr., cornerback for the Houston Texans, was the AFC Defensive Player of the Week. And it's funny because the game that he had against the Miami Dolphins, where he had 2 interceptions, and the last one being the game-saving touchdown, because the Texans were only up by a score of 20-12. And Miami had the ball, and it looked like they wanted to go down for the game-winning drive. But, Derek Stingley does what Derek Stingley does, and that's, shut down all hope. And it's funny because after the game, when I got a chance to speak with Derek, he said that he's a savant. He's a football savant, and there's not too many things that's going to get by him. Now, he's going to get beat on some plays, of course. Everybody does in the NFL, especially on the defensive side of the ball. But he knew exactly what they wanted to do. He knew exactly the play that they were going to run just by looking at the alignment. As soon as they came out of the huddle, he knew exactly what they were going to try to do. And holding a player like Tyreek Hill isn't easy. He's one of the fastest players in the NFL. And I think that what Tua thought was going to happen was, by the time he put the ball in the air, Tyreek Hill would have the advantage on Derek Stingley. But everybody's seen the way that he played. And so, having those 2 tackles for losses, having those 2 interceptions, playing the way that he's playing, being named AFC Defensive Player of the Week. But when you look at him, it isn't just his play on the field. It's the things that he does off the field with rookie cornerback Kamari Lassiter and rookie safety Kalen Bullock. I mean, they call him All-Pro Sting, and that's to be honest with you, that's the chip that he's carried on his shoulder ever since he's gotten into the NFL. And he was always compared with Ahmad Sauce Gardner up in New York. And because they went 1 pick apart, Derek went at 3, and I think Ahmad went at 4. And then Sauce Gardner made All-Pro 2 years, and Derek had to deal with injuries. Then last season he should have. So just having him on the field is what helps out that defense. D'Amico Ryans told us that the way that he's played this year is just been amazing for the Houston Texans. And so on the defensive side of the ball, that they're the ones that gets the job done. The offense has been not as productive as the defense has, but when you have cornerback Derek Stingley playing the way that he's playing, and then you have defensive ends Danielle Hunter and Will Anderson Jr., who are combined, I think that they're the top-rated duo as far as defensive ends are concerned, as far as combined sacks, with 22 and I think it may be 22 and a half sacks. And then you have the return of Christian Harris on top of the way that safety Kalen Bullock is playing, and the way that rookie Kamari Lassiter is playing in those defensive tackles. And so, it all starts with Derek Stingley Jr. being able to pretty much shut down one side of a field, and then everything else flows into that.
Yeah, and when you look at him and this defense, they're going to have it's going to be a matchup. Patrick Mahomes is Patrick Mahomes. It does look like he's going to play. We're going to talk more about that here in the next segment when we get to the Chiefs side of the ball and talking about their biggest story of the week and how that's going to go. But you look at Stingley and you look at what he's done for that Houston Texans defense. I mean, you're right. He shuts down half the field most of the time. That is something that is one of the most valuable things you can do on a football field. Go back and watch, guys like, and I'm not trying to say he's Revis, so please, anybody that's out there going to not like this, just forget that I'm saying that part of it. But go back and watch a guy like Darrell Revis way back when he shut down half the field. Those defenses were dominant because they didn't have to really do anything on that half. And then you can game plan and scheme, and you can have guys that maybe aren't necessarily going to be as good fits in doing exactly what you need them to do on the other side of the field, and you could make it work. So when you have a guy like Stingley that can shut down half the field, that is a huge boost to your defense. The thing that you brought up, and I want to talk about these guys a little bit more later when we get into our matchups in the last segment, but Willie Anderson and Danielle Hunter, that is a formidable duo. And Patrick Mahomes is not going to be looking forward to going against those guys on an ankle injury that like I said, we'll talk about here in the second segment. But the interesting thing to me is you bring up Stingley, and I understand why that's your biggest story. But to me, looking at this Houston Texans team, it's what has changed so much from this high-flying offense that they seem to have last year and even early this season to kind of what they've been dealing with the past month. I know Nico Collins was out for a while, and that took some things away from their offense. But what have you seen that's kind of changed?
Well, with Nico being out for a while, and then Joe Mixon was out for a while. After, I think, in week 2 against the Chicago Bears early in the game, he got illegally tackled with a hip drop, and so that had him out for a while with the ankle injury. And so you lose Nico for a while, you lose Joe Mixon for a while, and then one of their biggest off-season acquisitions in trading for Stephon Diggs, who with the Buffalo Bills, to bring Stephon Diggs in, and then you lose him for the rest of the year. And so now everything that they wanted to do coming out of training camp kind of gets disrupted a little bit because of, like I said, in the second week, you lose Joe Mixon, who is a big part of your offense. They had to play a game without Tank Dell. And like I said, when Nico Collins went out, he was the number 1 wide receiver in receiving yards in the NFL. Great. And so you lose that on top of the fact that the Houston Texans have been dealing with there's been a twofold problem for them. The first is the offensive play calling by Bobby Slowick hasn't been the same as it was last season. And a lot of that is also due to the fact that they've been having an interior offensive line issue. They mixed and matched the left guard position and the center position so much this season. And we live in a copycat league when it comes to the NFL. And when you have these teams that want to do these blitzes, these delayed blitzes and these different types of delayed stunts, it just makes it hard for when you got a player coming back, 2 players in Juice Scruggs, who missed the majority of last season due to injury, came back late. And then you have Kenyon Green, the left guard, who missed the entire season last year, coming in playing for the Bobby Slowick, playing in the Bobby Slowick system for the first time. And so that twofold problem has made it very hard on CJ this year because he's been getting hit a lot more. He's been pressured a lot more. He's been sacked a lot. And I know I'm preaching to the choir because Patrick Mahomes has went through the same exact thing, except the difference is the Houston Texans had, they lost a lot of close games that they should have won, and the offense should have been able to get them over the hump to win. And those games that they're losing, the experience of the Kansas City Chiefs gets them, over the hump in those one-score games. And so it's just something, that they're learning. CJ, this is his second year. I know he blew everybody away in his rookie season, and he was, it was really phenomenal. And once defenses are able to scheme a little bit more, because also what defenses are doing are playing two high safeties and they're not allowing for the explosive plays. And so what CJ has learned to do is over the course of the year is take what the defense has given him. And so, it's a learning process. I do believe that the Chiefs are the blueprint for what the Houston Texans are trying to do.
You bring up all the injuries on the offensive line, and while Mahomes has been getting hit a ton, it hasn't been because of the interior. It's been because of the tackles. You guys have got the tackle play, but don't have the interior. So if we mash them together for a game, I think you'd be pretty good.
You can beat the Bills.
Yeah. But you have a situation where Scruggs hasn't practiced so far this week. You have another guard that is a full practice in Kenyon Green, and Nick Broker looks like is full practice as well. So maybe you'll get those guys. But your interior still could be a problem up against a guy in Chris Jones, which we'll talk about here a little bit later in the matchup part. But I do think that this offense versus the Chiefs defense is going to be intriguing, because one of the things that Spagnuolo does very well is he scouts the teams that he's going to play, and he figures out schemes that are going to stop you or at least slow you down. And while I agree with you, the double high safety issue has been something across the NFL. You have to find a way to beat it. Mahomes has been doing the same thing, taking the shorter shots to some extent this year. CJ's been doing that. We'll see what we see when this game kicks off on Saturday, not Sunday. A little bit of a different schedule this week. And we're going to talk a lot more about this Chiefs game and the Texans game when we get back after this. It's that time of year. The college football playoff is back, and with the newly expanded 12-team format, it's guaranteed to be bigger and better than ever, bringing you all the hard-hitting and high-flying excitement that you love. TNT Sports coverage of the college football playoff begins December 21st, starting with the college football playoff kickoff show presented by AT&T at 11 a.m. Eastern. Leading into our first matchup, the Southern Methodist University Mustangs battling the Penn State Nittany Lions at noon. Then the Clemson Tigers look to upset the Texas Longhorns in a showdown at 4 p.m. Eastern. Don't miss a moment of the action. Watch the college football playoff presented by Allstate, live on TNT, True TV, TBS, and Max. Time is our most precious commodity, so don't waste yours scrolling through the same mind-numbing content for hours and hours. How can you spend it wisely to improve yourself? Our sponsor, Hillsdale College, is offering more than 40 free online courses, including, here are just a few of the courses available: Constitution 101, the meaning and history of the Constitution, Introduction to the Free Market Economics, The Great American Story, A Land of Hope, The Rise and Fall of the Roman Republic. All of Hillsdale's colleges are self-paced so that you can start whenever and tune in wherever. Plus, you can go deeper with readings, quizzes, discussions, or just enjoy the lectures. Go right now to hillsdale.edu/lockedon to enroll. There's no cost, and it's easy to get started. That's hillsdale.edu/lockedon to register. hillsdale.edu/lockedon.
Welcome back to the crossover edition of the Locked On Chiefs, Locked On Texans podcast. There is a huge game this weekend between the Kansas City Chiefs and the Houston Texans. And, for some of those older Texans fans, they have some bad memories, Chris, about playing at Arrowhead Stadium. They remember that long day that they had when they had that huge lead on the Chiefs, and then they came back. That's still a sore spot for some. And so there's a lot of older Texans fans looking to come to Arrowhead and to get a win on Saturday. But what are some of the biggest takeaways coming out of Kansas City?
Well, right now, and I have to admit, when I think of Chiefs Texans, that's the exact game I think about. And sorry for your fans, but that's the one my brain goes to every single time. Because it was almost an instant classic, at least from the Chiefs fans' perspective. I understand why Houston wouldn't be saying that. But when you look at this game and when you look at it from the Kansas City Chiefs perspective, it all comes down to Patrick Mahomes and his health. Right now, as of right now, he practiced in full on Tuesday and Wednesday. It looks like he will be going and playing on Saturday because he's fully practiced, and it looks like they're probably going to have him play on Saturday, which if you would have asked me after the game, I don't know that I would have said that they would expect him to play. It doesn't shock me with Patrick Mahomes because he's just that type of player. He doesn't want to miss. But the other thing that you run into, and we kind of referenced this when we got into this conversation under your segment, they played on Sunday. Now they're playing on Saturday, and then they have to play in 4 more days on Christmas Day on a Wednesday game.
Yeah.
This is 3 games in basically 10 days, and for him to be going through an injury, especially an ankle injury, which makes it to where he isn't going to be able to run like you normally would want him to be able to do. He's not going to be able to move in the pocket like you'd normally want him to be able to do. That makes it a little bit more concerning for me. But the fact that he's practicing full tells me he's going to play. And the one thing I will say, and I've kind of looked at this a little bit and thought about this, if the Chiefs win this game against the Texans, maybe what they do is they say, okay, fine. We're a game and a half up on the Bills for the number 1 seed. We can lose to the Pittsburgh Steelers, give Mahomes basically 2 weeks off, not play him against the Steelers, and then wait and have him play against the Broncos. And as long as we lock up the 1 seed, we'll get another bye after that.
Yeah.
And you're in a situation where you can be going in and you can get almost 2 weeks of rest for a lot of your guys by doing it that way. And maybe that's what they do. So I'll be really curious to see how this game turns out. But if they get a win against the Texans, I do think it's a question mark of how are you going to figure you're going to play on that next Wednesday game. I know we're focused on the Texans, but it's a big question for the Chiefs. And I know it's going to be a big question for you guys too, because you're going to be in the same boat.
Chris, I have a 2-part question for you. One, is this a must-win game for the Kansas City Chiefs? Because you touched on it just a little bit as far as the games that they have to play with the Texans on Saturday, and then coming back on Christmas Day, which is Wednesday, and I think they play the Steelers, and then they end with the Broncos. And so that's 3 teams that are currently in the AFC playoff.
They're 5th and 6th, I think.
Yeah, they're currently in the playoffs, and you're looking at a Buffalo Bills team who owns the tiebreaker, and they play the Patriots twice and the Jets once, and I think they have a combined record of like 5-23 on the season. So 1, is this a must-win game for the Kansas City Chiefs? And 2, Patrick Mahomes has played on an injured ankle before. He's had lower body injuries before, and we've seen him still perform at the highest level. But does the Texans defensive line scare you when he does have to do that amount of running? I'm not talking about just running from Will Anderson and Danielle Hunter. They like to do a lot of flushing towards the middle, where they've gotten very good this year at the defensive tackle spot. And so now you're running him into Danico Autry, Tim Settle Jr., Mario. I think Mario Edwards, when they slide him over in that area sometimes. And so the Texans have some very, very violent defensive tackles. And do they want Patrick Mahomes stepping up into that?
So to start, I do think this is a must-win for the Chiefs. And if Mahomes plays, I think that's the way that they're looking at this game. To me, and this is not a shot at the Texans, I think they have a good defense, but the reality is when you go look at the Texans may have the most sacks between those 2 defensive ends, but TJ Watt and Highsmith have been 2 of the guys that have gotten to the QB the quickest in the NFL. And to me, that's a little bit more concerning than just the sacks, because you're talking about getting hurries quicker. You're talking about getting more hits. And I'm not trying to take anything away from the Texans. I think they have a great defensive line and a great defense. But I do think that when you look at this, I am a little bit more concerned about the Steelers' defense and their defensive ends. And I don't like that matchup, because when you're talking about there's a big difference. And I know it doesn't seem like it's a big difference, but there's a big difference between a 2-second window or a 2.5-second window or a 2 and 3/4 second window, which is what you could be talking about when you're talking about the Texans and the Steelers. And they have to get it figured out. And I don't know that you want to put Mahomes in a situation where he's going up against 2 of the defensive ends that have been getting the pressure the quickest. in the NFL, at least going into this week. I think I'm pretty sure that that's still where they are, but I hadn't had a chance to look at that. But your second part of the question, so do I think it's a must win? Yes, because like I said, if they win this game, then they'll only have to win one of the next two. If they lose this game, they likely have to win out to have a chance at being the 1 seed. Because like you said, the Bills are playing the Jets and the Patriots twice. Mm-hmm. So the schedule makers didn't do the Chiefs any favors at all when they came up with the schedule. And they're playing the 3, 5, and I think the 6 seed is it sits right now. When you look at the question about the defensive line, I do think that when you look at the Chiefs, one of the things we talked about in the last segment as well was the Chiefs' offensive line is good in the interior. Now the big question is Joe Thuney going to continue to play left tackle, which it kind of seems that way since Humphreys is not practicing still this week. Mm-hmm. So I think Thuney's probably still going to play left tackle, which makes you a little concerned about the left guard spot, but you still have two of the best in the NFL in Creed Humphrey and Trey Smith. So I think you have to feel pretty good about him stepping up into a pocket there. Is it going to work the way that I want it to work? No. But the reality is like you're dealing with injuries right now that you haven't dealt with all season. And one of the things you also said in your last segment was, the Texans have had to come back and change what they were planning on doing on offense this season to an extent because of injuries and whatnot. Kansas City is in that same boat. Like you go back and you watch game 1 of the preseason, their first pass was to Hollywood Brown, who then went out and got injured on the exact first pass of the preseason, hasn't played a single regular season snap. And I'm telling you from everything I saw, he was a huge part of what this plan was for this offense, and he hasn't played a single snap. If they get him back this week, I think that opens things up. He's going to be a guy that should be able to get open quickly. Everything I've heard about him in practice is he's looking quick. He's looking like he should be able to step onto the field and have a impact. I'm not saying he should be out there 75% of the snaps, but if you get him out there for 25 to 30% of the snaps and you get him consistent targets and quick targets, that changes the dynamic of that pass rush.
Like I said, it's going to be an interesting matchup, especially, and so my thing is when you look at Danielle Hunter, though, I mean, Danielle Hunter leads the league in quarterback pressures.
Yep.
And I think that he's like head and shoulder above anybody that's closest to him. And the way that he started off, the sacks weren't there, but he's one of those players that says, I don't mind starting off where I start off and where I end up. And I mean, right now he has 12 sacks on the season, and you have, like I said, you have him and Will, and I just think that having those two in the way that I've watched them play is going to be interesting, and with them getting Christian Harris back at the linebacker position, so I think it's going to be interesting.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that, and let's talk about that a little bit more when we get back, talking about the matchups, keys, and our predictions for this game when we get back. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. So we kind of talked about this a little bit the last segment, but let's just dive into this a little bit more. One of the things you talk about, Danielle Hunter, and you talk about Will Anderson, and I think that's a great place to start when you start talking about matchups in this game, because you're looking at a situation, and I'm guessing based on what happened last week and the fact that Humphreys hasn't played, that they're going to be going up against Joe Thuney, who is a left guard, not a tackle, and Juwan Taylor. Juwan Taylor has been okay. He's been better this season than he was last year. Not what you would want probably as your starting right tackle for the money that you're paying him, but Joe Thuney is a phenomenal left guard, but he's not going to be playing there. And now you're in a situation where you're going to have him go up against a guy that's leading the NFL in sacks and pressures. And that's going to be a tough assignment for him. And I do think that one of the things Kansas City needs to focus on this week is trying to maybe run directly at him early on, and not saying that he can't stop it to some extent, but run directly at him and then try to come back and do the quick passing game and try to get the ball out quickly and wear him out that way, because I don't think you want to be taking deep shots on it with a guy that can't really roll out. We'll see what Mahomes looks like, but this is going to be something that's concerning going into this game for me.
Yeah, one of the things that's concerning, one of the biggest concerns for me, and we've spoken about the Houston Texans offense and some of their, inefficiencies this season. And I mean, anytime you have Chris Jones, no matter where he lines up, D'Amico had a lot to say. Head coach of the Houston Texans, D'Amico Ryans, had a lot to say about Chris Jones and the way that he can move up and down the line. He said you can play him on the inside. You might see him playing on the outside, and him giving, every offensive lineman that he goes up against fits. And I had a chance on Wednesday to speak with left tackle Laramie Tunsil, and he said it's going to be a good matchup for Titus Howard, who has moved from the right tackle position to the left guard to help shore up some of that line. And that's going to be a tough matchup for him, especially for somebody who, this is the first game. I mean, this will be the second game he's played at that position in a very long time. And going up against Chris Jones and, the way they slide him, like I said, up and down that line, it's going to be tough on CJ to be able to recognize where Chris Jones is at all times, because that's going to be the key. Also, the Kansas City Chiefs have a very, very good run defense, and you have to make sure that if the Texans want to be effective, if they want to be effective against Kansas City, I think that they're going to have to get Joe Mixon going in that running game and get him going early and often as they can, so he can open up maybe some passing lanes for CJ to throw the ball to Nico Collins. Maybe we can get Tank Dell involved a little bit more this week. Maybe you can see a little bit more of Dalton Schultz, and even using Joe Mixon out of the backfield as a pass option. And so that is one of the biggest concerns that I have when I'm looking at the Kansas City team and saying, here is a team that starts and stops. As much as I've talked about the Houston Texans defensive line, I mean, the Kansas City Chiefs have a very good defensive line as well, led by Chris Jones. And so, that's going to be interesting. And real quickly, I want to see how on the defensive side of the ball, how rookies Kalen Bullock from the safety position and Kamari Lassiter will match up against, even if Patrick Mahomes is injured. I mean, his arm isn't, his mind isn't.
True.
And he can manipulate you. He can navigate anything. If he gets to an open spot, he'll make you think that he's throwing right, all the while he's looking at, left, which could be former Houston Texans DeAndre Hopkins, who is still a very reliable wide receiver and very good possession receiver, or Travis Kelce, still being effective as he is, finding spots in a zone to be able to sit down. And so I'm eager to see how D'Amico matches with his former coach in Andy Reid when D'Amico was there in Philadelphia for 1 year with Andy in I think it was 2012. So it's going to be a matchup of the minds. And I don't think that, here's the funny thing real quick, Chris. I don't think that each team is going to go out and give too much, because they could potentially be playing again in a couple of weeks.
No, and that's a great point. And I do think that actually plays into this. And I think that actually plays into how Kansas City looks at all these three games as well, because you're right. They could be playing all three of these teams in the next month and a half again. And that wouldn't be the best scenario for Kansas City in any way, shape, or form. So you talk about the rookie safeties. What that brings my mind to is I'm sitting here kind of getting a little bit giddy, if I'm being honest, because to me that says Xavier Worthy and Hollywood Brown on a deep route somewhere. You got two of the fastest guys in the NFL that are going to be on this roster, and I think Hollywood does play this week. I don't know how much he'll play, but I do think he's been full in practice both times, so I do think that they're going to have him out there, especially considering that it's a short week against the Steelers the next week. So I think that's going to be intriguing to see how that works out. really the last thing for me is, and you kind of mentioned this, the Chiefs' run defense has been fantastic this season. I'm not going to say that they've been shut down and they're keeping running backs under 50 yards a game. That's not what I'm trying to say. But when you can keep running teams to 60, 70 yards, usually most games you're going to be good. It's when you get in a scenario where they're running and gashing you for 5 or 6 yards a carry and they get up to 95, 100, 120 yards, because that wears your defense out. 50, 60 yards you can deal with. And if they can stop the running game, that makes it a lot harder for CJ to be able to hit in the passing game.
Yeah. And you have going up against one of the toughest things in trying to stop Joe Mixon is he's very good on the cutbacks. He's very good going one way and can switch and change directions. And, you think that you have him stop going right for a 2-yard loss, and then he cuts back to the left and picks up 20 yards.
Got to be very defensively sound.
Yes, for sure.
So, all right. I know we're not going to give score predictions, but how do you see this one shaking out?
I actually believe that the Houston Texans will get themselves together offensively and pull out the win, especially going up against a hobbled Patrick Mahomes. Now, Patrick was fully healthy. My prediction would be a little bit different because Kansas City is so good, but I do believe that with the defense that the Houston Texans have and getting CJ, that we've seen glimpses of CJ against Miami having some of that old CJ magic. I think that the Texans will go up there and pull out a win.
Well, I'm not going to give a score either right now. You'll get that from me on the preview show tomorrow. But I will say I think that Kansas City finds a way to win this game. I do think that Andy Reid has looked at the schedule and he's figured out exactly how he wants to attack them in the last 3 weeks of the season. And this plays into that. And the only reason that you're going to have Mahomes out there and playing is because you think that you need him to go out and win this game, because you are looking at the last 2 games going, I don't want to have to win both those games to get the number 1 seed. Because the reality is you're in a situation where you haven't had a bye week since week 6. You could almost find a way to get 2 bye weeks if you can win this game, because you can rest some players against the Steelers and then they have to go win against the Broncos and get another week of rest as the number 1 seed. So we'll see what happens. That is going to be it for us today. Big Sarge, it's been a lot of fun. Really enjoyed this. Looking forward to this. We may be talking again very shortly. There's no doubt this could be another repeat situation in Kansas City in the near future. But that is going to be it for us today. Thank you all for listening today. We really do appreciate it. Go check us out on YouTube. Thank you for making us your first listen, and thank you for checking out the Locked On Podcast Network. And we will talk to you tomorrow.